We know that climate change is increasing the risk of extreme weather events such as tropical cyclones and storm surges. But many small island nations still lack the basic weather and climate services they need to protect their vulnerable communities from the increasing impacts of these extreme weather events. In September 2014, the government of Samoa hosted the third United Nations Conference on Small Island Developing States. A key focus of this important conference was on the urgent need to address the growing impacts of extreme weather on the world's most vulnerable small island nations. Here, the World Meteorological Organization invited selected leaders, donors and weather experts to two special events to discuss how partners can best work together to strengthen weather and climate services for all small island nations. The first panel discussion was filmed in front of a live television audience at the headquarters of the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, located in the hills above Apia, the capital of Samoa.
Hello and welcome to a special event here at the third UN SIDS conference, the Conference for Small Island Developing States, taking place here in Samoa. My name's David Eads and I've come here armed with a question. How well prepared are small island weather and climate services for dealing with extreme weather events? Cyclones, storm surges, flash floods. Climate change experts are pretty clear these days. Those extreme weather events will become more intense. They will become more frequent as well as the years go on. So how far can the current services cope with what they have to deal with today, and certainly what they're going to have to deal with tomorrow? These are critical issues. These are life and death issues, which is why the World Meteorological Organization has brought together a panel of leaders, political, meteorological, environmental, to see how well they're doing. Particularly, Pedro, I think you would see the risk, the dangers of climate change, perhaps leaving Pacific Islands way behind now.
So what is the benefit? The challenge with climate change is that there was a recent IPCC report published a year ago, and it was demonstrating that we will see more these most intense tropical storms in the future. And at the same time also sea level is rising, which means that we will have a higher risk for coastal flooding, and also the chemical composition of the seawater is changing when we put more CO2 into the water, so it's going to be more acid, and it has an impact on the ecosystems. And all these impacts together, which will last for at least for the coming 50 years, and they will intensify for the coming 50 years, they will pose the fact that there's need to build much better national early warning systems. So you have to adapt to the climate change for the coming 50 years anyway, and thereafter, if we are really lucky, then we can see some mitigation impact out to 2050. But it's a long way to go, and anyway we have to invest in the med services for the coming 50 years.
Tonga hit by Cyclone Evan, hit by a cyclone harder than you've ever been hit before, a Category 5, thumping really. How did you manage? How do you feel you managed?
For the first time in our history, we were able to issue a state of emergency 6 hours before the actual impact. And working together with the National Emergency Management Office, all the necessary warnings were given from the office, as well as information from the National Emergency Management Office on evacuation procedures and the like. I went personally and asked the communities, when did you actually leave your home? And the answer that I got was, it was either when their house collapsed or when the eye of the cyclone passed over.
So a little bit late, basically.
That really tells me that the communities are not understanding the information that we are giving them.
Jose, you've been doing this for a long time in Cuba. You seem to have get an impression of an almost military-like precision in terms of the way in which everybody understands the system.
To me, there are three main points. Three main points are the good forecast, of course, and that people has confidence in the meteorological service. The second one is civil defense that has to take that message, that very message of the meteorological people, and turn it into actions to protect people. But the other one is very, very important, is communication with people, with a plain language. Plain language, no jargon, no nothing. I always say my colleagues, you must talk to the people as if you were talking to your mother, your father, or your sister or brother. Same words.
And it's also a challenge for the Met community that we are not only communicating temperature numbers or wind speed numbers or rainfall numbers, but we have to communicate the impact of the weather. And when it comes to these cyclones that we were talking about, it's important to tell that now the tree starts falling, the electric system will be broken, there will be coastal flooding and so forth. And this kind of information you have to be able to provide. And you have to, there's a chance for the more advanced meteorological services to help to others, and I think that there's a great potential in that.
I'm interested that you've all talked about the importance of communication. This is all about communication, but what about resource? I mean, let's be realistic. You're not, your coffers are not overflowing, I imagine. How short are you on investment, do you think, in terms of what you would need for the job that you would like to do?
I'll give you our budget. Our budget is 85% salary and 15% operation. So you could imagine it's almost impossible to operate a network of weather stations with that kind of resources. When Tropical Cyclone Ian was tearing through the Hawaii Islands, was one thing that I felt was really in need. We didn't have enough weather observations coming in. I had to get on the phone to various islands to get reports of estimates of winds, just normal observations. It worked for the time, but when you are working in a systematic way to try to produce weather forecasts that are accurate enough to warn your public, resources as scarce as that is a really, really big problem.
I think that the role of donor is to help to see what are the national needs and comfort those needs. So it's not top down. It's really bottom up. And the long-term challenge is that the own government should also get involved. So that's the way to ensure the sustainability of such development. So one has to motivate the own government to allocate resources. And for example, World Bank has estimated that if you invest $1 to Met service, you get $10 back as national benefits. So it's a good investment for the government, and that's that's a message that has to be conveyed to the decision makers inside a single country.
Well, I think the main message is that invest meteorology and weather services are not an easy issue, as Polito said. However, it has a great profit. The great profit of investment in weather service, and it is costly. Radars, meteorological stations, automatic satellites, and human resources is costly. But they have a profit. The profit is saving lives and properties, and that's something very important.
The international community has an obligation. They have an obligation to assist and to raise the meteorological services to a state where it is sustainable.
Why? Why do they have an obligation?
The consequences of what is happening worldwide is global warming is produced by countries that are emitting carbon dioxide at rates that are enormous rates, and it's affecting everybody. It's affecting all countries in the world.
Yeah, personally, I believe that that the investment into med services is perhaps the best way to adapt to climate change, and also there's a need for sharing good practices among the developing countries. We have, for example, quite advanced meteorological services in Africa, and it would be highly helpful for the others to learn from their experience. And also, we just heard from Cuba that they have fairly advanced med service in the Caribbean region, and also sharing this kind of know-how is highly important.
During the Cyclone Evans, we didn't have the infrastructure in place that we have now. That we have all the climate and weather forecasts very advanced in terms of, and provided early warning systems, and plus the fact that we better prepare the people.
So even in 2 years, you've made a sort of quantum leap in what you have. And is that as a result of Cyclone Evan?
Well, sort of, we look at Cyclone Evans and we realize that there would be more what you call extreme weather events that will occur frequently and intensively, as you correctly mentioned. And that's why our government was prepared in a way to respond to this extreme weather.
Jerry Linguaza, we've heard two very specific examples, and there were nothing else about it, pretty dreadful circumstances. How indicative of that is that of the rest of the Pacific region, if you like, of many other small islands?
Significant progress has been made in very short periods of time to developing early warning systems in the countries that need them the most. But more needs to be done. I don't think we are quite there, especially in respect of the advancements in the technology that we have. Ultimately, the information that is available from both weather and climate services is anticipatory. So the question would be, is 6 hours sufficient for a hurricane warning, when in fact we can see it in most cases in some of the models even a month ahead.
You bring me nicely back to Tonga in a way. There's a lot of talk already about partnership and cooperation and collaboration. I mean, there have been some voices saying, but perhaps Tonga was a bit too quick to say, thanks for the international assistance, you can go now. When actually you might as well make the most of the offers that come in, and that people could have stayed longer. Is there an element about, I mean, for all small island states, of national pride in managing these things themselves as much as having collaboration and partnership?
Right. There's no room for complacency. We should always prepare ourselves for the worst. And since this is a global phenomenon and that's contributing by everyone, and I think is an issue of all of us equipping ourselves psychologically, financially, and also institutionally, and also legally for the worst case scenario. And I think this is the time to do it now. And I think the SIDS conference highlighted, the important to mainstream this particular issue. So prepare yourself for the highest standard of good, because you pay off when it actually have the calamities arrive in your town.
We keep coming back to this issue of translation and perhaps communication, which is a problem for all of you. And I heard that there are some meteorological terms which work well in one word in English, but it's a full sentence and a half in some of your languages, which suggests it's a very difficult challenge to overcome, and a cultural one as well. But is that your responsibility individually within Samoa and within Tonga and within Kiribati? Or is that something where you've got to have help, that you're looking to the likes of Hans here to put his hand in his pocket?
It's our collective responsibility, because I say this from my experience with Samoa and Cyclone Evans. that there was a complaint that the information that was given out to the people through the media was very technical. It's not in the layman's language that people can understand easily and get prepared and aware of the seriousness of what was going to happen. And that is the problem that we faced during the time of Cyclone Evan. And now we sort of we learned from the Cyclone Evan, and there are about 3 early warning systems that are now in operation in Samoa. One is for climate, the other one is for earthquake and tsunami, and the other one is for cyclone. And then we have the weather forecast. You know, these are all the investment that the government has put in place in order to respond and get the information.
But that's the point, isn't it? You can have all the systems in the world. It doesn't really matter if the message doesn't get through, does it? Can any of you put your hand up and say, yeah, we've cracked that actually? Was that a hand or a finger?
There needs to be a translation of that science in a way that is understandable to the end user, especially if you take hurricanes. It is the hurricane which has winds, but you also have storm surge, which may be coupled with that. You have other hazards. And so how do you then ensure that in an integrated fashion, that information reaches the citizen who has to take action as per request or out of their own free will?
Different examples, different stories here. David, if I could come to you again, then do you think it's possible to have a template that would work for all small islands? Because A, that would be much cheaper, wouldn't it? And perhaps it would give everyone a universal understanding, whether it's of symbols or of a formula for giving out early warnings and what to do and the like.
Well, I think information is a challenge. It's often, I've heard the analogy with climate and weather information, it's often like trying to drink from a fire hydrant that's turned full volume. So it has to be interpreted in a way that makes sense to the community. If you travel around Samoa, you'll see the tsunami evacuation signs, which are quite clear, understood, now used throughout the region. Simple communication tools that are easily understood and can be communicated quickly are fundamentally important. For example, before, during, after extreme weather events, the use of mobile phone technology, for example. So I think we are learning from these examples, but there is a need to translate that fire hydrant down to a way that makes sense at the community level.
Hans, it strikes me that, I mean, to manage to achieve that in terms of communication, it's going to cost some money. But not necessarily vast amounts. In terms of investment, the vast amount presumably comes from the infrastructure for weather services and climate change services. Whose responsibility should it be to fund?
I think it's quite easy to say in simple words what people need to do. They need to have information and they need to know what to do and where to go. But for all of us, it's a global responsibility to make that kind of investment in global weather forecast.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you, but because I suspect that some of the gentlemen here would say, actually, it's the industrial world's responsibility, because they're the cause of an awful lot of the problems that we have to face. And I just wonder if you stand up for the industrial world and say, no, it's yours as well.
I think it's always a common responsibility. We have a common responsibility for our citizens. And it's very much true that the Pacific region has little responsibility for the problem we are facing today, climate change, and certainly the countries of the north and industrialized countries around the world have the major responsibility for making that kind of investment that you're talking about. But the governments in the region have to show political commitment to doing the right things. I mean, partnerships only make sense if we can do things together. So I think.
Do you think they get that generally? Do you think they get that?
I can't stress that enough. I mean, the weather is a global issue. Climate is a global issue. If we can't do things together, we won't get anything done.
President Tong, I know you've said, or I might paraphrase you a little bit, but essentially, maybe Kiribati is the guinea pig, the test case that makes the rest of the world realise when you go under that you've got to act, and you've got to act now. But surely with substantial investment and human ingenuity, you could save your islands yet.
Oh, definitely, but I think the question is, will the resources that would be required to do this be made available, because we don't have those resources. And there's no question about it. The Dutch are doing it. They've been doing it for decades, centuries. We can do it. There's no doubt about it. But we need the resources in order to be able to do it. What kind of resources? We've had the Japanese come and visit me in Kiribati, and they said, "Oh, we can build you an island, a floating island for around $2 billion." Okay.
Oh, and you'd have to pay, would you?
Well, of course, we would have to pay. So the question is, who should be paying? And the question is, who is responsible? Who has the moral responsibility for dealing with this? I think this is the point that I've constantly been making in terms of the challenge of climate change. It is a moral challenge, because we're talking about human life here. We're talking about human values and what we have to do in response to what's happened. Who is to take responsibility? We don't want to keep pointing the fingers, because nobody wants to take the blame, but I think we have to sit down and talk seriously about what to do with those that become the victims. I always think about when there's a boat and there's somebody swimming and he will drown if you don't put him on the boat and you have room. What is your moral responsibility?
I think there's been a sense of a certain frustration on the panel here, and certain aspects in which the access to funding is achievable or not. An agreement also, though, that communication remains the key. Simplicity of communication vital, and as vital perhaps as investment in improved services as well. So could I ask you all to thank the panel of leaders here who've given their time to educate us and give us an idea as to where we may be heading in the years ahead. Panel, thank you very much indeed. And I'd also like to thank you, the audience, for being with us this evening and for your questions. Many thanks, and thank you for being with us. Thank you.
you.